From religion to wrestling, gumbo to grits, politics to poetry, and all things Southern in between, this is Take on the South. Produced by the Institute for Southern Studies and hosted by the College of Arts and Sciences at the University of South Carolina, Take on the South examines the highs and lows of the American South, examines the truths and fictions of the country's most distinctive region, and picks the brains of some of its most accomplished students. To understand the South, you need to take it on, and that's what we'll be doing. Join us as we take on the South. Love them, hate them, but absolutely need them. They are the arteries that allow us to live. Sometimes they cost our lives. They are avenues for escape, yet also offer a means to come together. They take up space, but mainly save us time. They are expensive, but cost-saving. They are cultural touchstones, but literally concrete to the touch. I am, of course, talking about roads, highways. And at the moment, more than ever, roads are a very southern issue, or rather a specifically South Carolina issue. Because goodbye Malfunction Junction, hello Carolina Crossroads, a roughly $2 billion multi-year project that would affect and improve the lives of millions of travelers in South Carolina. I'm Mark Smith, Director of the Institute for Southern Studies at the University of South Carolina, and I'm your host today for Take on the South, which examines the most expensive road reconfiguration in the state's history. To help us make sense of all of this, we are joined by Brian Klauk, the Carolina Crossroads project manager, and Pete Poore, the South Carolina Department of Transportation's Director of Communications. Gentlemen, welcome to Take on the South, and a hearty thank you for taking time out at what is an extremely busy moment for you.
Yes, good morning. Thanks for having us.
My pleasure entirely. I'm excited about this because I think it's one of those scaled projects that has a real impact on so many people and will for so many years. But before we get into what you're up to and what you're doing, can you tell us about Malfunction Junction itself? And I realize that this might sound like a terribly obvious question to people who live here or who have lived here, but let's imagine you have a foreigner coming to South Carolina, and he's driving in, or she's driving in, and he's quite used to London roads and their spaghetti knotted concrete. And he comes across this thing called Malfunction Junction. I speak from personal experience here. I was shocked. I was like, my goodness, what is this? And why is it like this? And how long has it been this way? So what's the brief potted history of Malfunction Junction?
Well, it's an entanglement that Brian's going to continue to spend the rest of his life on, getting it sorted out. But to define it simply, it's where three interstate highways converge. It's I-26, and that in particular, if you're coming up from Charleston, or I-26 as you're coming down from Greenville. I-20 is in the vicinity, and I-126, which goes into Columbia, they all meet. And if you've ever heard the expression trying to put 10 pounds into a 5-pound bag, that's pretty much the way the traffic has been ever since the 60s and now the 70s, when I-26 was expanded from 2 lanes to 4 lanes in each direction. You should have been there then. But in any case, that is the entanglement, that you're pouring traffic in from 3 interstates or 4 interstates, sort of.
So Pete, when the original Malfunction Junction, which it wasn't called that, I'm sure, I certainly hope it wasn't, when that was complete prior to the first expansion, that was roughly when? Was it in the mid-60s, late 60s?
I want to say it was completed in the early 70s. So
early 70s.
Construction always takes years. So.
Right. So, and that area back then was nothing like it is today, correct?
No, for those who are familiar with Piney Grove Road, that was pretty much the end of the world.
Is that right? Okay.
On 26.
There was no Harbison Boulevard.
There was no Harbison Boulevard. There was a man named Michael Mungo, who was trying to carve out subdivisions out there for people to live in. It was pretty much farm country.
Okay.
So the travel in that area was pretty much nil. The problem was getting in and out of Columbia on 126 because, as I said, there were only 2 lanes in each direction.
Right.
So that was a bit of a knot. Yeah. But the traffic volume is nowhere near what Brian has been dealing with.
So back then, it was perfectly sort of adequate for a while, and then you had to expand it. And then, I don't know where I've read this. Perhaps I saw it in a movie that the more roads you create, the more traffic comes in, right? I mean, basically, you can't really you can only keep ahead of it by a few years.
That's my philosophy.
Is that right? I'm sure there's plenty of evidence for that. At what point, I'm not asking for a year exactly, but at what point did the nomenclature, the term malfunction junction kind of populate popular culture? I mean, when's the first time you heard that term?
Well, my family moved here from California in the late 70s. And as a young boy, I remember it always being called Malfunction Junction. So I can't remember a time when it wasn't called that.
Right. So it's always been that. Yeah.
It's always been the knot. Even as I said, Piney Grove Road was the end of the world. You had to get through Malfunction Junction to get out to no man's land.
Do you know why it was designed that way? I mean, what was the origination of this?
Yeah, originally it was the confluence of I-26 and I-20. That cloverleaf interchange was just the standard way to design an interchange when 2 interstates in the middle of the forest met, and vehicles just needed to change from one interstate to another interstate. It wasn't until that development that Pete was talking about that people really used it for commuting. And it was that commuting plus interstate travel use that started to congest what was there. But it was early on, maybe 10 years after the completion of that, Malfunction Junction 26 and 20, that whole interstate interchange and the whole lengths of those roads. It was right then, about 10 years later, when we started as SCDOT, the endeavor of looking at how to continually improve. And it's been continuous improvement over the decades, and you can see those continuous improvements out there, but we're not where we'd like to be. And that's what Carolina Crossroads is for.
Gotcha. Understood. All right. South Carolina, it seems to me, at least, when you look at it in the population densities, it's Charleston and Greenville, and they've both had their own refurbishments of roads, especially the Greenville one, which took several years, didn't it? That was a big one. And now it's Columbia's turn, right? Kind of the episode.
In terms of interchanges, that's correct.
Yeah. The Greenville one is rather lovely. I think it looks very smooth, and it was apparently quite smooth, so congratulations to you for pulling that off. How many cars go through that intersection every day, roughly?
So on I-26, about 134,000 vehicles per day, on average.
On average.
Travel that corridor, but it's really even more than that. And we saw the dip during the pandemic. It's come back up some, and in various places it's come back up more than others. Mm-hmm. But I fully expect it to make a recovery of traffic and beyond.
Yeah.
Looking out towards the future, and that's what we've planned for.
Yeah. So that number will increase to, what's your expectation for the volume?
We've modeled it at a 3% growth rate per year.
Okay.
Which is probably larger than we will experience, but we've built that padding in to ensure that what we build doesn't begin to collapse in terms of traffic functionality. Mm-hmm. Soon after the projections. We've modeled it out to 2040, but it has resilience for beyond. And of course, when you get out to 2040, who knows what kind of automated connected vehicles, how that market penetration will intersect what we do here in the construction. So we've really attempted to try to forecast and accommodate the future growth.
That's a really interesting point that I just hadn't thought of. Historians have their strengths, but the future is not one of them. We tend to linger in the past. So the idea that automated vehicles would probably change just the driving dynamics on this road, right? And it occurred to me, and perhaps I'm being overly sentimental about this, but I realise there's quite a lot of accidents at this junction, but it's so well known and it's so ingrained in local culture. In fact, it's probably Southern culture. People know this intersection for miles, other states. In your opinion, and I know there's no science behind this, but precisely because they know when you're joining, 20 to 26, that gives you all of, 50 feet to get over, it seems to me. It's almost designed for a Model T Ford. It's okay if you can do it at 20 miles an hour, but anything more than that, it gets complicated. But is there some sense of etiquette that's evolved, do you think, in that very tight junction where there's a kind of Southern etiquette of people saying, no, you go ahead now, or let me join, or am I just being fanciful?
I would say this. There has been a rise and fall and another rise of truck traffic, 18-wheelers. Back in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, textile mills in the upstate were thriving, and those trucks took their goods down to the port. So even though the local traffic wasn't all that much, there was lots of freight traffic going that way. Textile industry died, and then our state leaders brought in the high-tech businesses, the BMWs and all their support companies and all that. So the trucks started flowing again. Truck drivers don't yield to anybody.
So I've learned, yes. Well, that's a terrific point. And it sort of reaffirms the kind of whole internationalism of that part of the road, right? I mean, you've got ships coming from all over the world to one of the largest ports on the East Coast and taking it up. And it's also you can get to lots of places from Columbia precisely because of this interchange.
Also, another point would be the tourist traffic. You do not want to be on I-26 between Irmo and Columbia on a Saturday morning, and then a Saturday afternoon, because everyone's headed. Let me back up. The people it's checkout day on Saturday. Mm-hmm. All those people who are up and down the coast, they're coming up this way. They're taking 26 up. They're coming in from 20, and they're headed back north wherever they want to go. Just from a visual standpoint, as a resident of that area, there's more traffic on Saturday afternoon than there is during weekday rush hour.
Is that right?
And then in the afternoon, everybody's going to the coast to check in.
Yeah.
It is incredible.
It's fascinating to me that these kind of fairly distant things like the coast sort of generate these bottlenecks here. Absolutely. That is very, very interesting. Look, your website, I think, is fabulous for helping people visualize the various phases, the timing of these phases, the sheer scale of this undertaking. And I don't think we can really do that justice just by sort of describing it on our podcast. But could you give a kind of quick thumbnail about how many phases there are, perhaps what are the sort of more straightforward phases versus the more difficult phases, and when they're going to be completed? Just kind of a brief overview, if you will.
Yeah, so overall we are looking at a 2029 completion date for all 5 phases. Phases 1 and 2 are underway right now. They're under construction. And phase 3 will be what people really think of as Malfunction Junction. Phases 1 and 2 are kind of at two legs, if you will, of this whole thing. And phase 3 is where the 2 system interchanges, that's where the interstates meet. Those are in phase 3. And we're starting procurement on phase 3 to hire a design build contracting team in September. So only in next month we start that procurement. It lasts for over a year to select the right team. That's a combination of their design expertise and their price. And that team will be awarded the construction of that largest component. Then phases 4 and 5 kind of complete the gap between phase 3 that will be completing. And 4 or 5 will actually start while 3 is underway. And that will take us from sort of the Malfunction Junction proper, if you will, up to an adjacent project that's under construction right now. So there's a lot of construction that's happening. It goes up from Irmo exit 101 out to exit 85. It's a multi-lane widening of 26. So all of that's happening kind of in the 2020s. Will be sort of the defining decade for Malfunction Junction in 26.
The scale of this thing is really quite disarming. Can you give me some metrics here? I mean, how many new bridges are you putting in? I mean, how much? I mean, are you using concrete or tarmac? How many workers are involved? What's the cost of this? Just kind of give us the hard numbers of it, because I suspect they're going to surprise people.
So the cost we've estimated to be $2.1 billion.
Okay.
It does make it the largest project that we've undertaken so far in South Carolina. Number of workers, it's going to ramp up and then ramp down anywhere from 200 to 500 on site at any given time. Most of that work will take place outside of traffic. So we're doing all this with sensitivity to the fact that this is a functioning interstate system that has to continually operate.
It can't close this down.
Right. It's like remodeling someone's kitchen while they continually cook for the family.
Oh my goodness, a big family too.
Yes,
right.
Like mine. I have 5 children. So it's a family my size.
Absolutely intolerable. Yeah, I get it. Absolutely. Good.
One of the things that we really look at is how do we minimize the impact on the traveling public while we do something so large scale. So that will be one of the main judgment criteria as we hire this next phase of contractors in the phase 3, is how can they sort of build a better mousetrap and accommodate that traffic in such an important junction, and still do it safely for the public and for the workers. I mean, 500 workers out on the site. It's a tremendous responsibility to make sure that everybody gets to where they are as safely as they possibly can. We're gonna be looking at all sorts of different kinds of construction of bridges. So 43 new bridges, 14 miles of interstate in total. So it's a very large undertaking, and we're bringing to bear not just local and statewide contractors and suppliers. It's going to be a nationwide effort, and we're even probably going to have suppliers from overseas that work through our contractors to bring things here. Of course, there are some materials that we want to, and by law we do Buy America, so steel and some other things that's really it's just a tremendous effort, and the coordination is great. We've got a very large team that works with us right now, a couple of prime consultants that have helped us deliver it to this far and will continue to help us with the construction and the design as we move forward.
So in a way, as an historian, I see this as very much a Southern story, not least because, from my perspective, the South has always been resolutely international. I mean, it was born of an Atlantic trade, right? And the Dutch were building things on the coast, the English were building. It has that feel to it that you're bringing in a lot of skill sets, a lot of raw material, and just a kind of world view that is focused on this 14 miles. And I think that there's a nice poetry there. There's a connection to the past. I know this is an odd question, this concrete versus tarmac thing, but what are you using? Using both, or the bridges tend to be concrete, the roads tend to be tarmac? Is that what this is?
Yeah, this is mostly going to be an asphalt job.
Okay.
The bridge decks and other components, other structural members will be reinforced concrete or steel. Some of the bridges will have to be long and curved, which will, in some cases, require steel members. But largely, it's asphalt, concrete, and steel. It's kind of like the essential building blocks of civil engineering are going to come to bear in mass quantities, all over the place.
And some of those very trucks that kind of cause some of the difficulties are going to be responsible for bringing that material in. Right?
Indeed, we rely on them to deliver us everything that they're building their own roads.
The poetry is endless here, isn't it? I have to say, I was coming back, and it's on 20 just outside of Lexington. That's concrete. That's a nice road. I'm sure it's much more expensive than tarmac, right?
Well, there's a trade-off.
Okay.
That concrete is more expensive as a capital expenditure, but then the maintenance costs are lower. various studies over the years have come to opposite conclusions about the benefits thereof, and you can ask each of the industries that support
I bet
each
you can.
material the benefits of each, and we appreciate their input for sure.
Yeah. But I will tell you, some years ago, there was a project to widen I-85 in the Anderson area, Anderson County, and our then executive director, Elizabeth Mabry, who's forerunner of a secretary these days, she personally went up there to make an announcement at a meeting that not only are we going to widen this section in Anderson County, but we're going to pave it all with concrete, and the room erupted because the people, these were leaders, and they knew that concrete's going to last longer, at least it's supposed to. The durability is higher. So people get that, But
yeah, and it's nicer to drive on, it seems to me, or at least,
But there is a cost.
Yeah, there is always a cost to these things. Have you had any supply chain issues? I mean, you're doing this in the echo of a pandemic. I mean, timing is hard, right? There's a lot of moving parts here, obviously. Have you encountered some of those problems? And if so, what are they?
We've been fortunate so far in phases 1 and 2. As the supply chain issues were the worst, and I think those are trailing off a bit as the world recovers. We've been fortunate not to be too tremendously affected. Right now we're doing these early construction works on those 2 phases, relocating utilities, logging trees where we need to put structures, various things like that. And those are not material intensive. When we get into this month and the next month, where we're going to see major construction start on, especially on phase 1, that's when our contractor who's on the job has got to deal with those issues, and it's their job to figure that out. And they've been successful so far. We don't have any major red flags. It's fortunate that we're doing a lot of things that are traditional kinds of construction, traditional materials. And a lot of our local folks and statewide folks are able to still generate the amount of supply that we need for phases 1 and 2.
We've been fortunate statewide. The description of supply chain issues has been defined as spotty here and there. May have to wait a week for something, maybe. But as a whole, everything seems to be flowing.
Oh, that's very encouraging. Very encouraging. I'm glad to hear that. Dividends. Always has to be a dividend to these things, and there are obviously lots of them. Can you kind of enumerate the principal dividends of this project? By 2029, South Carolina and this junction in particular will be better because?
This is one of 3 pinch points that we're concentrating on in our 10-year plan. One was the one you mentioned, the 385-85. Done. Check. Yeah. Right? There's another one that's coming that's under development, 526 and I-26 down in Charleston. Okay. And then this is the other one, Carolina Crossroads, Malfunction Junction. What has happened is it's a combination of safety and congestion. I mean, it doesn't take anybody one trip through to discover that those are the 2 major components that we're attacking, and we indeed are. With all the added lanes and ramps and the deletion of very tight loops and replacement with these ramps, these fully directional ramps, we intend to save the average driver 112 hours per year that they would otherwise spend in traffic.
Yeah, in traffic jams and slow-moving traffic. Right?
Yes, and a traffic jam doesn't have to be created by a crash. It can just be the overload of vehicles, and so we've really concentrated on that. The other thing is safety. You mentioned a few times, Mark, rightly so, where those loops come together. In an engineering term, we call it a weave, where you have to compete for space, hopefully politely, with your neighbors from across the country and just down your neighborhood who all need to be in the same space at once, coming on and going off. And so the vehicles do something that looks like a shuttlecock going through, a weave.
Yes.
And we've eliminated all those weaves or moved them to lower speed environments on on barrier-separated ramps that are outside of the interstate. So all those ins and outs and exits and entrances, all those movements will occur outside of the normal flow of traffic. And those two things right there will have a tremendous influence and a tremendous impact on improving safety and reducing congestion. And then, like you said, the national, statewide, local, national, the international impact of that is goods get to market faster. They're cheaper. There's not as many crashes. I mean, goodness, the impact on families when there is a injury or worse is tremendous. The great reduction of those is our highest hope.
I read somewhere, and I can't recall where, but there is a temporality to the number of collisions at that intersection between morning rush hour versus afternoon rush hour, but also time of year. That November, there were more collisions in November than there are any other time of the year. And I don't know if I'm giving you information here or not, but the explanation was quite interesting. It's people from out of state traveling for Thanksgiving and the kind of build up to Christmas or holidays in December, and they're not used to it. And there's a certain learned quality to that junction that the first time I went on it, I was like, oh my goodness, you know. But now I've learned to follow trucks. If you get behind a truck on it, you can skip over because nobody messes with the trucks, right? So I suspect all of that temporality will probably come more evened out. And I think you're entirely right about the kind of human cost of this. Can't really be overstated. And I'm sure your first responders that are responsible for attending to accidents out there, they're going to be hugely relieved, are they not? I mean, you have what? How many different municipalities attending to things out there? It's a bunch of different things, different regions, different municipalities. Like you've got Irmo. Also, their life is going to get easier, surely, right?
It should. It'll get a little more complicated during construction, and then with the investment of that, better.
Yes, right.
They are constant. We work a lot with them. We've talked to them a lot over the years in development, and made sure that we're accommodating their needs as well. Yeah. But my goodness, they spend a lot of time, and it's distributed all across these 14 miles. There are some locations, like just the other day, a tractor trailer turned over on one of the loops at I-20 and 26 and blocked 2 of the 3 lanes of I-20 for hours in the morning. You know, our greatest hope is that those will be either a thing of the past entirely or extremely rare occurrences where they're not nearly rare enough right now.
Where I-20 enters 26 near Bush River Road, we have the SHEP patrols, the blue trucks that assist motorists. Well, one stays parked there in the grassy area, just waiting for something to happen from 20 entering I-26. Just before you hit Malfunction Junction.
So there's a permanent sentinel ready for action.
Pretty much. I mean, they know where the action is.
There's no point in leaving that area.
Yeah, and they don't want to get they're 2, 3, 4, 5 miles up the road. They don't want to get a call and say, oh, I could have just parked.
Right. When you were talking there a moment ago, Brian, about just the chopping down of trees and the burying of lines. I mean, people just don't think about these ancillary issues that necessarily attend to such a large project. One of the sticking points, it seems to me, about expansion generally, not just in the South, but nationally, is this question of eminent domain. And what do you do with people's property? Because you're going to have to widen things. My sense is that you work very hard with local folks to accommodate their needs and your needs. How has that worked out? Can you tell me something about some of those tensions and how they were resolved?
Well, yeah. First, I'll thank our right-of-way team. We've got a team of about 40 people, including SCDOT, FHWA, the Federal Highway Administration, and our private consultant partners who are working one-on-one with businesses and families to make sure that their process with eminent domain and us is as smooth as possible. It's all completely based on state and U.S. Constitution, where people are entitled to, constitutionally, just compensation and the due process of law. There's another act, the 1970 Uniform Act, that lays out the processes of engaging with folks in the purchase of right-of-way so that it's fair, it's equitable, it's that societal trade-off between needing to do a public good and the unfortunate occasional individual impacts. We have over 300 tracks on this entire 14 miles that we need to acquire either some property from, or in some cases an entire parcel. And we've worked really well. It's almost kind of behind the scenes. Businesses have been relocated without much fuss. And our right-of-way folks do a fantastic job at having a goal be negotiating successfully so that we don't have to use the eminent domain option except for in very rare cases. And when we do, it winds up in the court, and either a jury or a bench trial, a judge decides what the fair compensation is, the just compensation. So our goal is to always make people whole in the after, while at the same time being able to accomplish the public good of being able to expand the interstate and let all of society enjoy the benefits of getting places safer and being able to do it in the least amount of time possible.
Okay. Yes. Makes sense. Are there going to be HOV lanes on your new Carolina Crossroads?
There are not. We're installing all general purpose lanes. HOV lanes and other ones like HOT, high occupancy toll lanes. Some people call them Lexus lanes because only there's a thought that some who are more affluent can afford them and others cannot. General purpose lanes they're a democratization of transport.
Yes.
But HOV lanes have their place. We did a study of whether or not HOV lanes would be beneficial, and actually in this particular corridor with this particular mix of traffic, they would be detrimental. Mm-hmm. They would be underutilized, and then the track of that HOV lane, especially in the mornings coming into Columbia, would actually not keep you on I-26. It would be on that inside lane, which would, in the case of the present condition, take you downtown. In the future condition, it could take you down to I-26, but it just doesn't benefit. It does more harm than good, which seems like a strange thing. But if it's underutilized, you wind up crowding the great majority of the traffic into at least one less lane. Right. And so with our mix of traffic, it wound up more beneficial to be general purpose lanes all over. And anybody can use it any time of day, no matter how many people are in a vehicle.
And no tolls, right?
Correct. No tolls.
No tolls. I was in Florida recently, and it was an interesting experience because it says, don't stop to pay. We would take a photograph of your license and we'd deal with it then.
That's right. Also with the hot lanes, many of them have electronic boards over them, and the toll goes up as the traffic goes up.
Oh, is that right?
Right. So during rush hour, the Lexus people, as Brian referred to, maybe they'll pay $20 to take that exclusive lane, and maybe they won't. But it's not a $2 toll.
No, I bet it's not. It's a bit like the London charge. You have to sort of spend £8 to get into London now, to drive into London. And I mean, I realise that cities around the world are having to sort of navigate congestion charges and what have you, but there's no toll charge on this particular road, right?
No, we only have one toll road in the state, I-185, south of Greenville.
Yes.
And we just removed one.
Right. We had a second one, but the toll was collected to pay off the bonds to construct the Cross Island Parkway, Hilton Head, and it's done.
And it's done.
For. In fact, there's a project going on right now to remove all the toll facilities.
Interesting. Well, that's encouraging. All right. Well, a slightly different question. This is a huge undertaking, and Brian, you're in charge of the project and coordinating it, and Pete, you're the communications specialist for the SCDOT. What keeps you up at night? I mean, what really worries you? Or does it not? I mean, are you fairly comfortable with how things are going and you don't have any last-minute thoughts before you're about to go to sleep?
Well, my continual problem with society is that society doesn't understand us. They don't understand our processes. They don't see the benefit in the overnight work, which will close lanes and that sort of thing. They don't understand, as you referred to earlier, Mark, about moving utilities. There are water lines, electric lines, gas, every sewer, every other thing you can imagine, data lines. You just can't rip through those. You got to move them. So the questions that I get, even from reporters who are not well versed on highway processes, as you might imagine, just getting the correct word out that it's, hey, this is not so bad, it's going to work, give it time, and here's what has to happen in between. But I'm confident in Brian. He's a whiz. He can take care of this.
Yeah, Pete, I'll pay those $20 later after the podcast.
No, we have a terrific team on this, and the contractors are terrific that we've engaged so far, and it's just been a good experience. But people don't see that. They just say, you're going to inconvenience me.
For me, it's that we've done everything that we need to do in order to make sure that it hits the target. I think what keeps me up at night is what motivates me every day, and that is that we need to improve safety and reduce congestion to a tremendous amount. I mean, if we're going to spend $2 billion on a project over 10 years, it's got to be worth it. This is not going to be an incremental change. That's not what we've signed on for as an agency, and that's not what our team has pushed forward with over 500 people having worked on it already, of different environmental scientists and engineers and finance people and communications people and archaeologists, on, historians even. We've got a collective vision for making sure that there is a radical transformation of this corridor. And that really, eventually, it gets out of the way, and that people utilize it in a way where it is not front and center. Constantly, I'm saying to folks that I speak with, if you call it Malfunction Junction for as long as you need to, but when we're done, we hope to earn the name Carolina Crossroads.
Mm-hmm. I like that. I like that a great deal. I think you folks have done an amazing job communicating what's happening and when, and people can find that on your website. And you're going to be sending out regular updates, is that correct, as things develop?
Yes, especially traffic updates. On our website, you can go, and it's updated weekly at a minimum, but sometimes daily, where you can see where things are closed. We're working with our traffic operations center, our traffic management center. They are in tune with Google Maps and INRIX and Apple Maps and just kind of everybody to distribute any kind of lane closures or ramp closures, any kind of things that would affect traffic. They are constantly monitoring the state of traffic, and especially will be during construction. We're on social media. We're just SCDOT Carolina Crossroads that's a handle you can find anywhere and engage with us. And we're constantly pumping out information.
I think it's very important that people can sort of hook into that, and it will save them a lot of aggravation too. Before we conclude, I just want to read a very brief pithy statement from William Hazlitt, who was a 19th century English essayist. And he was probably one of the most famous essayists of the 19th century. And he said this about roads. He said, "You know more of a road by having travelled it than by all of the conjectures and descriptions in the world." Ultimately, that brings us to 2029. What does the experience feel like rather than the description and everything we've discussed? It's ultimately an experiential thing, isn't it? And and I very much like the way you framed this, Brian, if it's a success once you've kind of forgotten about it, right? And it's become naturalized as part of your environment. Brian Klauk, Pete Poore, good luck with this amazing project, and thank you for being on Take on the South.
Thank you for having us. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
That was our Take on the South. Let us know yours. Find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at U of SC South. Take on the South is produced by Matt Simmons of the Institute for Southern Studies. Special thanks to Professor Dave Garner of the University of South Carolina School of Music for composing our music. Tune in next time for another Take on the South.